So colonization has a very intricate, subtle way of playing around in the minds of the black person and making them less than they are, than they know, than they deserve to be. And the impact of that results in neocolonization, where even when a black person is now in power, he does not remember where he's coming from, but he remembers where the white man wants him to go. So our present governments right now are there to enforce the same principles of what the colonizers were doing. So you come from the war, you've been fighting the liberation struggle, liberation. But the day you are liberated and you lift up your hand to be sworn in as a president, you are swearing on the white Bible. You are swearing into the white parliament that they built. You are swearing on the constitution, on the literature that they are giving you. And you are going to an office that the white men used to sit on. So your ministers and ministries are simply driving the same agenda. So neocolonialism for me speaks of a system that has been left to run under the management of blacks, but the agenda still remaining as white. And to liberate ourselves will mean we need to deal with the system as it was constructed so that we could build for ourselves a system that works for us. Neocolonialism, it's a concept now. It's a drug that Africa is intoxicated with. But maybe we need to define the colonialist first. Then we need to discuss the colonized second. Then we discuss colonization as a concept. And ultimately to be talking about neo-colonialism. So colonialists could simply mean after the Berlin Conference, which is the Congo Conference, and the division of Africa into the hands of the European colonizers. To name but a few: British, top of the list, the Belgians, the French, and the Portuguese, and the Italians. All started doing what we call the grab for Africa, or scramble for Africa, as they call it. And then getting there, you get there with your soldiers, you fight the local kings, the local chiefs, you take as many cattle as you can, in some certain cases, take women and children, create an industry of workers, have access to the resources, call your friends from back home to come over and take over land, take over mines, take over the means of production in the whole country. And this has been going on for 200, 300, 400, 500 years, to be more precise, but more intensively in the past 100 years. That we have seen the flood of the Europe into Africa. And I must say that America was not here, Russia was not here, and China was not here, and India was not here during that grab for Africa. So basically you're looking at the Roman Empire. So all of them are Romans. That's why we have even the Anglo-Saxons, the Romans, the Herulis, the Visigoths, the Alemanes, the Germans in Namibia. And then you look at them rushing into Africa, taking a piece of pen, drawing their maps around, dividing nations, dividing tribes. I mean, how does it make sense that the Maasai of Tanzania are different from the Maasais of Kenya, different from the Maasais of Uganda? Like, really? The Tongas of Zambia, Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. So colonialism simply meant the division of Africa into the colonial hands. The next group then will be the colonized. The colonized are the Africans, who then find themselves as subjects and slaves on their own land. No more rights of driving their own agenda. But now they must report to a system, and the system which reports back to its European principles. So colonialism finds its main drivers being the kings of Europe and the governments of Europe and their appetite for African resources and products and services, and to access that by force, bringing the people of those regions into subordination through war, genocides, and mass killing. And then colonization became the institution where these various governments started to work in cooperation with each other, creating preferable trade routes for each other, depending on their own relationships, not about local people. The colonization project becomes extensive so that even the whole continent of Africa is covered in this blanket of white supremacy. And with colonization came what we call white monopoly capital, where the economy of those countries remained now in the hands of the white people, and the blacks simply being looked at as workers, slaves, and servants. The impact of colonization is brainwashing, using religion, using education, using entertainment to create different role models altogether. Here now our children being taught Casper and the Friendly Ghosts, Tinky Winky. They're being taught, Snoopy Dogs. They're being taught the Seven Dwarfs. They're being taught William Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. Even when they go to school to study their own history, they don't study their history. They're being taught to study their history. It's not about us, it's about them. So you go to school, you're being taught about Napoleon Bonaparte, Charlemagne's, the Bolshevik Wars, the industrialization, and etc. And you wonder, where do you even study about Kemet, the building of the pyramids, the Great Zimbabwe, the Benin, technologies, and so colonization has a very intricate, subtle way of playing around in the minds of the black person and making them less than they are, than they know, than they deserve to be. And the impact of that results in neocolonization, where even when a black person is now in power, he does not remember where he's coming from, but he remembers where the white man wants him to go. So our present governments right now are there to enforce the same principles of what the colonizers were doing. So you come from the war, you've been fighting the liberation struggle, liberation. But the day you are liberated and you lift up your hand to be sworn in as a president, you are swearing on the white Bible. You are swearing into the white parliament that they built. You are swearing on the constitution, on the literature that they are giving you. And you are going to an office that the white men used to sit on. So your ministers and ministries are simply driving the same agenda. The laws of mining have not changed. The laws of land have not changed. The laws of indigenous medicines have not changed. In some certain countries, the laws of indigenous medicines actually fall under witchcraft, the Witchcraft Act. Now, how do you begin to say you are liberated when in fact your liberation has nothing to do with liberating your land, liberating your kings, liberating your culture, liberating your diet, liberating your celebrations? And so in your towns, you still find these big white men standing as statues. Your cities are still being called by the name of the colonizers. Your rivers is the same thing. And then the borders, oh wow, the borders are still exactly where they were as Leopold put them. And the question is, how civilized, how liberated, how independent are you when your independence now is no longer independence, but it is dependence? You depend on what? Donor money. You depend on grants. You depend on loans. You depend on the same colonial system to help you to build your... Now, where have you ever seen that happen? That the person who colonized you will help you to build your own country, when in fact it has always been about them building their own spaces. And this puts deep context to what I might want to call the Francophone Revolution. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and all these French once colonized spaces are beginning to wake up and say, no, we can't bank our money with you. No, we can't be watching your TV in our place. No, we're not going to be teaching French in our schools. We're going to find ourselves as Africans. So neocolonialism for me speaks of a system that has been left to run under the management of blacks, but the agenda still remaining as white. And to liberate ourselves will mean we need to deal with the system as it was constructed, so that we could build for ourselves a system that works for us. That place, maybe it's in heaven, very far from here. For black people to live with white people, it's a long shot, it's a long dream. If the white people were normal, if the white people were not greedy, if the white people were environmentally friendly, if the white people had tolerance, we could maybe live together. But their appetite of dominance is too much, that you cannot coexist in a same space without conflict. Because as soon as a white man comes into your space, he wants to arrange everything to make sure that it suits his world view. He cannot just come there and live and join us and live together in harmony with us. And worse, the question you're asking me, can a white man and a black man live together? Maybe I must ask you in a very sarcastic way, can a hyena and a sheep live together? Someone will be eaten right there. But more painful to acknowledge is the history which the white man has already written for himself in the minds of the black people. The crimes against humanity, the blood of our ancestors that are still dripping in their hands. In Zimbabwe alone, we have 18 of our royalties. Their heads were chopped off. Their heads are kept in British Museum right now, and their heads are being used as trophies and rituals. And if we're asking if we're going to be living together, maybe living together is such a polite word. Before we can live together, can we just talk justice? That you do it right by us. Bring back our heads. Bring back our royalties. Let us bury them in decency. We then begin to talk about the rule of law. If what you have done, can you be accountable for what you did? And I saw yesterday the Ghanaian government receiving 31 artifacts that were stolen during the British Empire's reign, and they've returned them back now to Ghana. Is it good enough just to return our artifacts? What did you do with them? The amount of millions you collected when people are coming to see these things, who accounts for all that? Now it's good enough just to bring the pictures back and here you are, here are things. You're dealing with thieves here. You're dealing with criminals here. You're dealing with murderers. Look at Kenya. No one so far has even come back from the British government to speak about the massacre of the Maasai during the Mau Mau War. And who gets accountable? And you want to talk about living together? You're living together in harmony without being accountable. I mean, if you're a damn criminal, thief, thug, murderer, a rapist, and you're asking me, how can a rapist and the victim live together? So you want to create a house where the rapist is sleeping next door and the victim is sleeping next door. Tell me, if that event would happen to you, will you close your eyes at night? Will you be able, as a woman, to close your room at night? Will you be able to walk to the bathroom and shower, knowing that the man who violated you is next door? You're asking me a traumatic question, madam, to say what you are seeking for is trauma of the highest order. The best thing we can do to live together is just move away from my space. Let me heal. Let me find myself. Let me gather myself around the people that love and care for me. Let my sense of being and value. And when I'm fine and I'm okay, and I say I want to meet up that guy, and I just want to look him in the eye and ask him what was going on through his head, it's your right. Because you're not looking for anything, you're looking for justice. And if you feel like you want to revenge, what must stop you? Because the other one also had the right to rape you So this whole issue of retribution, restitution, reparation, and restoration, it's a process which even the African leaders are scared of talking about. And to live together is more than just eating food on the table together. It's mutual respect for each other. It is dignity for each other. It is giving each other spaces to become who we want to be without fear from the other person next door. And it is you staying in your lane and give me space to become myself. If to be African is being given the ability to express oneself without fear of ridicule, being told I'm less than, being labeled, and being disenfranchised, and worse, not being given means of production, resources, even access to the basic commodity which is land, just for me to plant my food and eat with my children. So if you're talking about living together, before we can live together, we need to level the ground, very much so, and restore it to its original use, and let us as indigenous people decide where we are going to position you. But the closing remark, the day we are going to live together nicely, it is the day Americans, white Americans, are able to live with black Americans in peace. It is the day when Europe is able to deal with Africans that are in Europe, the refugees that are in Europe. When that day comes, don't ask me a question if Africans and whites can live together. Ask me the question, can Africans live with Europeans together? Because that changes the geography. It looks like when you have this conversation, it's about us as Africans accommodating them on the African ground. Let's just make a U-turn and take 2 million Africans and move them into Europe. Maybe move them into London, deliberately so. And let's see how the British government will be able to respect them, restore them, give them land, give them food, allow them to reproduce and recreate themselves in their own British land. You will find that you will have caused enough trouble. They are not comfortable doing that. So it's mutual. Let's not ask whether whites can live in Africa in harmony. Let's also ask, can Africans live in Europe in harmony? And don't expect the African to do what you cannot do as Europeans. Right now, Britain is organizing to repatriate all those people to Rwanda. Why? Because we can't live with them here. I lived in London for 5 years. Terrible space. Immigration space. Terrible space. Segregation, racism, smells in the nose. And I don't think Africans are racist because we're all big one race. Racism is from the same colonial people who want to live in harmony with us. So until they look into their souls, and this goes back to theology again, because a part of their theology was teaching them in the last generation that Africans have no soul. They're not human, they're animals. Now, how do you tell a person who thinks he is a human being to come and live with people he deems as animals? The readiness of Africa to assume its rightful place on the world political space will come with what I want to term political will to make that transformation. It comes at a cost. When you kick out America, you kick out Britain, you kick out France from your economy, the impact will be felt. I know that from Zimbabwe. The impact will be felt immediately in terms of the shrinkages in the banks, the collapse of the insurance companies, the collapse of the health system, the collapse of infrastructure development, the freezing in of loans and donations from foreign countries and foreign aid and etc., the restrictions and sanctions in terms of militarization, buying weapons and etc. I have first-hand experience as Zimbabwe for the past 20 years. We have been on sanctions from the West and its partners in Europe and etc. The readiness, therefore, you can never be ready to as a mother. You can never be ready to deliver a child. You can never be ready. If you have been through the maternity ward, you may have a faint idea of what I'm talking about. When the day comes and that fella must come, they will come when they must come, despite the pain that as a mother you have to go through to endure this. But the short term is painful as these systems are closing in on you. But in the medium term, you begin to see a resurrection of new indigenous business people like happened in Zimbabwe. Now they froze petrol, fuel, and what, and all this, and then local people started getting into that space. Now we have guru billionaires who are dealing in petrol, some are dealing in imports and exports and etc. A new breed of millionaires, much more than we produced during the times of beautiful independence. That's in the medium term. To the short term, it's collapse of the economy. And I'm saying so that our young brothers, Mali, Burkina Faso, Senegal, can prepare for themselves, because the white man never changes his ways. It's the same thing. What they did to us, they will do to you. So be prepared to have your economies collapsed. Your only guarantee of success is food security. Go back to indigenous seeds. Go back to food security. Secure the food basket. When you take over those farms and etc., convert your military division into an agricultural field, into an agricultural department. Take those fields, convert your trucks of war into trucks of fertilizers and manure. Make sure that people are full. Because when people have eaten, they have better quality of politics. Because a hungry stomach does not know politics. You can be talking about ideologies, but if I'm hungry, the first thing is food. And therefore food in many times is used as a weapon of war. You can read that in the book, The Economic Hitman. You'll find quite some interesting information in that. So in the medium term, you begin to see a recuperation. Those who are going to get involved in solving the problems of the short term, follow me carefully, when the banks collapse, which African will be able to pick up that and create? When insurance collapse, who will do that? When suppliers run out, which amongst the Africans will begin to? This is the call for diaspora. When you hear that your country is going through this, come on, stop what you're doing in your country, come back home and start investing into these businesses, so that come the medium term, the Africans are now able to run a parallel system to the colonial system. And in the long term, Africa will begin to see industrialization all in the hands of the Africans and look for relationships amongst themselves. So yes, it will cost them an arm and a leg. And when people are hungry and people are, if no medicines and etc., then propaganda comes in. You see these African leaders, they're failing to run their countries. They need help. We need humanitarian things. We need to send the United Nations with guns and weapons, and we go and rescue the people from their local person. The propaganda comes in now again, and the very same people, like the Israelites walking from Egypt, they start complaining again. Can we just go back? Like in South Africa, the Africans are saying, no, let's go back. Let's go and find the white people back. Just come and give them this economy, let them run it, because you blacks are failing. And when people begin to have that deja vu of just having bread and butter, but not dignity, then colonization really worked. For it only did not colonize their minds, to colonize their stomach, that even with the promise of a land that they can own, they would rather have a white man walk with them to their own liberation, instead of supporting their own local leaders to deliver to them the future that they deserve. Software controls hardware. If your software is of an inferior quality, there's no way you can expect your hardware to perform better than it is performing. If you fit in your beautiful brand new iPhone 15 or iPhone 16 and beautiful phone, and then you load on it iPhone 9 software, what would most likely happen is that your expensive phone will start acting and behaving like the software which has been installed in it. I come from the olden days when we had Microsoft 1.1, those days. Control, alternate, transfer, shift. What you needed 6 fingers just to underline, or move a file. And if you should take the software of Microsoft 1.1 and upload it into Windows, it starts reading error throughout. Vis-a-vis, if you take the hardware of 1.1 and you upload onto it the Windows program, it corrupts the whole system. What am I saying? The quality of education that the African has been fed, the quality of role models the African looks at, the quality of music the African listens to, the quality of success that populates our mindsets as young people. When you grow up, what do you want to be? Who do you want to be like? And some people want to be like James Bond. Some people want to become like some musicians. Some people want to become like film actors. Why? Because this is the imagery of success that we've come to accept. And therefore it's not entertainment. It's enter and attain. What enters you attains you. It holds you. It occupies you. It molds you and it builds you. Therefore, you always wonder why we are producing inferior kind of Africans. Because from cradle to kindergarten to primary school, high school, college, university, their entire life is populated by the idols that they've been watching. And by the time they finish watching, they want to become like those idols. So you're asking me, why in the film industry do Africans always play? Why? It's like the other day I was asking a simple question. Why must I go and find a woman who has got artificial wig on her head when I actually can find the one who has an original wig on her head? So why must I go and date an African woman who has got Indian hair when I can actually find an Indian woman who has got Indian hair? Why must I deal with the fake when the original is there? So you get into the movie industry, will you ever find a movie where a black man was put as a white actor to fit in a white character? Let me look for a movie. Let's do King Henry and let's make him black. Why should you look for someone who must act like when the one who looks like is available? So you already come out as an inferior product because you lack originality. And above all, you don't own the industry of movies. And movies are a level of propaganda. The agenda is clear as to what they want to achieve through those movies, and it is to maintain that white supremacy that you're talking about. So until we own our own production houses, and I would love to see a white man acting in a Nigerian movie, and what role they would give him in that movie. It would be very interesting. And that is the same thing. When you're walking to the white media spaces, you must not be worried as to why black people are always given the first 3 minutes in a movie. Immediately guns are shot, the first one to be killed is a black man. Out of the picture. Why? Because you're not part of the storyline. You are footnotes on the storyline. And creating wrong images of that nature destroys the ego, destroys the attitude, destroys the worldview of the African young people. And as such, they will always act the fiddle on the film script, footnotes on their own storyline. Decolonization is a process because colonization was a process. If colonization was a process of mental conquering, decolonization must be a process of mental reprogramming. And my first bus stop will be restoring cultural activities within our own villages, restoring the central place of the drum within a community, restoring our own indigenous foods, our birth stations and maternity wards, indigenous birth methods. It is, and from that level, then harvest that content and move it into media. Popularize your own culture. Rather than showing us all these white movies, start showing us the real content of where we are coming from. The next level will be taking that content from media into education. Make it a curriculum. Teach young people the rites of passage. What is there? What must they learn about their own culture, and etc. And ultimately transform your governments to become pro-African. Why should you have a bunch of Kenyans putting on jackets and ties, walking into parliament and speaking in English and what? And of what benefit is all this? Why should we be here glorifying the same colonial system in our independence. So if you are independent, then move away from, you cannot say you hate the white man. You hate the colonialists must get out of here. Well, hallelujah. And after that, shall we pray? So the colonialism was wrong, but his religion is right. So, but just gently, if not violently, remove the very elements of oppression and allow the young people to begin to learn. What am I talking about? Create schools of innovation. Create schools of cultural expression. You will be shocked the amount of talent that you will unlock in the minds of the young people. Instead of fixing and pushing our children to become speaking in tongues and become pastors. Come on, look at the Chinese. They're already doing computer works, programming. And what's wrong with us as black people? Starting to teach our children the science and the arts of war of the previous generation. What material is this made out of? What was it designed for? How do you use it? How do you work with it? And etc. And in terms of science, what kind of science is this? And where can it be? And for me, the African cultural space presents us a huge opportunity of decolonization. Because by introducing the superiority of our own technologies, be it birth control as a science, be it, COVID was the best thing that could have happened to Africa. Because out of COVID, Africans knew where their herbs were. Even the pastors, the other day I found a whole pastor carrying a whole 5 liter of indigenous medicines. And in fact, we're going to die. He's checking this thing and he's drinking. All of a sudden, crisis presented to us an opportunity of tracing back. So we cannot only trace back in terms of COVID giving us medicines back. Our fashion is right at the back there. You look at Gucci, you look at Armani, you look at Versace and all these European brands that have literally stolen African symbols to create brands for themselves. But let's not worry about what has been stolen. How much is still available in terms of that art form and crafts, which still can be beneficiated into. You look at the Maasai cloths and all these things. I saw them in Europe the other day. People doing some catwalk with them in France, and it's supposed to be French couture, huh? But it's stolen African knowledge systems. Decolonization, we decolonize our food, decolonize our hair products, decolonize our facial products, decolonize our clothes, decolonize our technology, decolonize our medicines, decolonize our governments, decolonize God, our religion, decolonize our faith, decolonize. Decolonization is a big word. It simply means reset the African body to factory settings. As a technological person, I think you may appreciate that. When your phone is no longer behaving nicely, just delete everything. Reload. Factory settings. And you may just have your phone performing much better. I think we have too many useless apps. $3 to $5 billion of fake hair business running through Africa. Because the Africans thinks not good enough. Body products, facial products, billions of dollars. Why? Because the African feels not good enough. Not good enough. And that not good enough, when it gets to your mind, you start cutting yourself, adding things and subtracting things, punching. Have you seen some of those celebrities after they come from surgery and they look like Halloween night, look like ghosts from the graveyards? Because when you are not happy with what you are and who you are, life knows no vacuum. You will occupy yourself with the character, behaviors, and habits of those that have colonized you. Decolonization, reset the African mindset to factory settings. My best example I can give you is the student revolution that has happened over students standing with Palestine, Columbia University, Oxford University, South African University, British universities. The whole of America is on fire as we speak right now. Why? Because when the cause is right. It strikes a chord with everybody else. Burkina Faso, Mali, now, as of 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Senegal has even walked onto the stage with a much bolder statement. Pack up and go. Switched off the TVs and what, just go. And anyone who thinks that, see, our age groups, the 40 years and above, we're in the deep end because we're now CEOs of Old Mutual. We're CEOs of multinational companies. We are beneficiaries. We are almost looking forward to our retirement. We don't want the system to change because we benefit. But the students have nothing to lose. They're actually looking forward to a much more integrated society than the parents are. Take note, the opening up of universities to international students. Now here you are, top of the crop, Harvard University, with Pakistani students, with Palestine students, in the same classroom, with Jewish students, and American bigoted parents, students, children, in the same class. Friendships amongst the students. Common understanding. Unity and harmony amongst them. And then your father is the army general in Palestine. And I am a victim. My sister lost her legs and her eyes, and your father killed my sister. The politics changes altogether. So if you're looking at what has happened to Burkina Faso as a joke, the younger generation is beginning to hear a different voice of liberation, that it is possible. We cannot be called Africa and a poor third world dark African continent. When right now we can also speak English, we can recite poetry, we can also run machineries like everybody else, we can create our own fashions, we can do our own engineering. We now know what gold looks like. We now know what diamonds look like. We now know what platinum and lithium can produce. We can also make our own industry and produce our own batteries. No, man, something is not happening here. Someone is not telling the truth here. And that frustration, worse when these young people are now graduating from schools and they can't find employment. Because the colonial system only funnels a few. Mathematics and English, you pass there, then you get to school, you get scholarships, and then they swallow you back. The rest of you go back to work. So and you cannot run a system which literally tells you failed primary school, you failed high school, you failed your college, and you have all these dumping sites away from school. You start class at primary school, 100 of you. By the time you get to primary school, maybe it's 80 of you. By the time you get to high school, maybe it's only 50 of you. By the time you get to college, maybe it's only 10 of you. By the time you come to graduate school, maybe it's only 3 of you. The same class that you had in your primary school, if right now you said, now you're a doctor, a professor, how many of you? It could be 1 or 2. What happened to the other? What happened to the other 98? They fizzled out into spaces. And when you look at a system that throws away people like that, frustration begins to grow on the wings. And as such, what happened in Mali, what is happening in Senegal, what is happening in Burkina Faso, what is happening in Niger? See, you're asking that question. Didn't it start in Niger? And then from Niger to Mali, from Burkina Faso, now Senegal. And watch the space as the young people of Africa, just like the Palestine student revolution, as it begins to happen. It's very interesting to note. Any government that is going to have elections in the next 2 to 3 years, take an advice from a fool. That is me. You need to watch very carefully the youth vote and the direction of their intentions. The young people are now tired of old goats who go to parliament as a retirement package, who simply go there just to maintain the status quo and continuously show a smile at the United Nations when taking pictures with whites, and come back home here and there's no change. So yes, I can confirm the revolution has started. It will not stop. We'll do well to cooperate with each other to deliver the Africa that we want. And I'm part of that revolution. I was actually prepared Had France striked Niger, I was ready to go to war myself and go and join him in the liberation of Africa. That is the Che Guevara spirit. The white community, because the black community is already in huge suspicion, the quality of relationships that we are going to establish going forward are not going to be based on the terms of reference of the colonial system where we are coming from. I mean, big kudos to China, big kudos to Russia for coming in, not rightfully so. We don't hear them getting involved directly in terms of fighting, but their support, great support. Even in terms of, we need a big brother, let's be honest, when it comes to security and other things, because the Americans and the British and the French will not take the losses lying down. They're going to be looking for other methods of starting up other coups, assassinations. We already have a good history. Muammar Gaddafi is evidence. P.O. Lumumba is evidence. And Magufuli, we are not very sure, but there are problems right there. And the list can go on and on. So the quality of relationships we're going to establish, the white people who are going to survive in Africa are those who are now walking in here with respect for local people and with cooperation. And they're coming in not to colonize, but to work together in partnership with the Africans. They are the quality of white men who can ask, how can I help you? How can I work with you? How can I assist you? How best do you want to utilize what I have and what I have? And by the way, this is not an abusive relationship. It is mutual, because it is in that relationship that the person who is coming with the resources is coming to the one who has resources. So it's mutual. What do you want from me? You want a bit of uranium? Okay. For what cost? 1, 2, 3, 4. And I like what the young man did for the uranium, Tory, for the uranium. He said, you want your uranium? It's okay. You've put the power station right here so that the switch for power will be here. And if you misbehave there, I can also have an opportunity of switching off electricity for you. Now that's, for me, that's mutual relationship. So if you don't respect me, yet I have the resource that makes you good, then maybe you're not my good friend altogether. Because it cannot not only work for you. And this whole concept again, which must be cleaned up very quickly, of Western interests. America must protect its interests. France must protect its interest. And you wonder, when did your interests fly from New York to Africa? In which aeroplane were they to arrive here? And when are you going to start discussing the interests of the local people also? So is it all about you being a bully, walking up in a supermarket, walking up on a table and cutting off all the choice pieces of meat that you want? And then you leave the Africans with the head and the skin and the hoofs and say, okay, that's what you can feed on. That's African diet. And you take away all the nice choicest parts of meat. That mutual respect is lacking. And it's sad, it's very sad to say the American government, the British government, and the French government in particular. I isolate those three governments and the Israeli government. They are the total nuisance to the whole world as we speak right now. They are the nuisance, and I want to put it on record. America, Britain, France, and Israel are the biggest nuisance in the world right now, and their allies. That includes Australia, that includes Canada, that includes the other puppies that are running behind them to support everything that they are saying. Our heroes right now is Russia, it is China, it is India, bit of Brazil, who seem to be understanding our problem. It's not the 100% solution for Africa, but what they're bringing to the table is far much better than what the colonizers have done with us for the past 100 years. So we need a different strategic partnership with the Western world, and that relationship must be based on honesty, truth, and if they are really honest that they're talking about democracy, they must include the word self-determination inside the democracy, that the African is free to express himself the way he wants to express himself. Like Museveni said, don't bring your culture and try and confuse us here. We are fine. We are doing just fine. And if you want these people that practice other things, you can take them to your place. And there are also people in your place who don't like what we can bring them here, so that we create harmony. So So we cannot use culture as a form of tension and as a token of payment. You live according to our standards, then we'll give you money. If you don't adhere to this, then we'll freeze up our... Then I think that's quite an abusive relationship. And honestly speaking, that kind of money, even if I was a leader, I don't want that money at all. Africa has never forced its culture on anybody. We've never asked people to do rituals in Europe when a person dies. We've never asked their young men to come to Africa for circumcision. We've never enforced. In fact, let me say it nicely. A mature culture respects itself enough not to wish another person to become like itself, but allows other people to become who they are. Maybe that's how mature Africans are. You've never seen a crusade of traditional people putting a tent and doing a crusade to campaign to bring people to our side. We don't do that. You're okay where you are. And this whole thing of LGBTQ becoming a game player, a critical role player in the international politics, it's a decoy. It's a decoy because it's not honest, it's not truthful, it's not productive. In fact, since America wants to become the gay capital of the world, I have good news for America. Let them tomorrow morning make a declaration to open up their borders to all the gay people in the world who want to leave. They can move over to America. And all the people who want to build homes and families can come to Africa. I guarantee you, in less than 30 years, if not 50, America will be a ghost town full of dead bodies, coffins and graves, because that's a dead end of life. I'm an old man. I cannot be led astray by stupid little modern slogans of alternative lifestyles. Life happens between husband and wife. That's where life is. Even the gay people are born here. Therefore, we cannot destroy the heterosexual fountain, for that's where life is coming from, and promote these other marriages and alternative lifestyles where there's death altogether. So those that say, Maponga J, you're homophobic. I laugh and giggle and say, if I'm homophobic, are you heterophobic? So it does not work that we can use this population control tool, demasculination of men, as an agenda for Africans. No, what we need is life. This is a deathbed of procreation. This is the dead end of self-aggrandization and self-pleasing. There's nothing that comes out of after this. This is entertainment. The real home is mother and father and child. That's where humanity finds its continuity. And me, in my status, from my royal house, and as a responsible old man and citizen, given an opportunity to send a message to the world, I will say, choose life. Choose life. For that's what has brought us here as humanity. These are the methods here. You can go for entertainment. But when it comes to regeneration, procreation, longevity of humanity, we need to protect the family. And I stand in full support of Putin himself. He is changing the game altogether. Known as a communist, and communists were known to be this and that. Now we know capitalists are a problem. Because look, capitalists used to say, in Jesus we trust, in God we trust, in God we trust. Now here is a very God-driven country, America, becoming a demon-possessed country of war and moral distortion of the highest order. And I think it stands in Putin's favor to begin to speak values of family, drug abuse, abstinence and etc. The whole thing, even the other day, he kicked up some dust on the blackness of Jesus. I wonder how the white people will feel now If there's new evidence that this fella was a black man, and now the white people must come and kneel in front of a black Jesus, I want to be a fly on the wall and watch that surface. And because the trauma we also faced of thinking that Jesus was white. It must be very interesting to see them also beginning to deal with the trauma that maybe God himself is a black man. I want to be there and watch it happen.